Good morning and welcome to AB Talks. And it's the morning after the night before, and the European Super League is dead. Joining me now to discuss this is Joe Morrison, anchor with Facebook Football. Joe, we were talking about this just last night. What's your feelings this morning?
Mixed feelings, Scott, and I don't really know because obviously 6 clubs have pulled out, which pretty much ends the project. I don't see the other European teams continuing, even though they haven't officially, as we speak, made announcements yet that they're pulling out. But there's still a whole load of questions that remain unanswered, such as the format, such as finances, such as will they have a go with this kind of project again? So I'm more confused than I was last night.
I've seen plenty of your comments on Facebook this morning, basically saying this feels like the boys agreeing to go on a lad night out before asking the wives.
The thing is, I think the sudden nature of the announcements over the weekend, which was planned specifically, Scott, to preempt the UEFA announcements this week for the reformatted competition. So that was the whole purpose of it. But this has not been just a weekend in thought with regards to those clubs. This has been going on for approximately 5 years. There's some sort of discussion around this. So it's not quite as impetuous as you think it is. And there's some things that probably won't go away even after this, even after those 6 clubs have left and the project seems dead. I have no doubt it will be revived in some way, shape or form in the near or not too distant future.
So much has been made, obviously, of the fan reaction and the fan opposition to this. But talk to me a little more about the business case of this, because there were reasons why they walked into this European Super League in the first place.
Well, look, clubs right across Europe, and I'm not just talking about the big clubs that are involved in this, are in huge debts, Scott. Some of them are just unsustainable. Some of them are unserviceable. 1 or 2 clubs, there were rumors that Barcelona almost was not able to pay its staff at the end of January. That's how close things were. And Barcelona in the past, just 2 or 3 years ago, had a month where they didn't pay the players. So these debts are unsustainable. Now, the thing that people have to understand, Scott, is football clubs are cash-hungry monsters. How do you keep feeding that monster with cash? And that's the problem that they're all facing at the moment, because there's only a limit to the expansion you can get to. So one of the reasonings for this is that they wanted a league whereby 15 clubs were the same 15 clubs every season. Why is that important? Well, it's important because they were the big clubs, the big names, the global brands. And as a result of that, what you would get, Scott, is you'd get a Liverpool playing a Real Madrid. Everyone says every week. That's just not true. But you'd get Liverpool playing other big brands, or Arsenal or Manchester United. It would be big brands against big brands. Now, why is that important? It's important, Scott, because you can then be assured as your incomes and revenue streams for the next 3 years, the next 5 years. When Barcelona are playing Ferencváros, nobody's watching. It's just simple. And we have analytics now to prove that nobody cares about those games, a big team against a smaller team. And that's the problem, Scott, with the current format of the Champions League. The group stages do not generate that interest from the broadcast audiences. The knockout stages do, because it's big brand against big brand, but the group stages don't. So how do these clubs, how can they confirm their revenues for the next few years? You can't just go, well, you know what? We may get 3 or 4 games against 3 or 4 big clubs next season. You simply don't know that with the current format.
So obviously we've got a lot of local interest in this deal because of Manchester City and the Abu Dhabi backing for the club. They were interestingly one of the first clubs to actually step away from this, saying that they've been listening to the fans. Do you think they've made the right decision? Do you think they've done the right thing listening to the fans as early as they have? Or should they have listened to the fans before?
Whether it's the right decision, and you know the position I come from, I'm in favour of a revamped, reformatted, new style European League. So I'll park that to the side for a minute.
Yeah.
But Manchester City in particular, it's an easy decision for them because they are not in the same financial difficulty that Real Madrid are. Yeah. Juventus are $500 million in debt and struggling. The Chinese company that own Inter Milan, which were one of the founding members of this Super League, this ill-fated Super League, they are in dire straits and struggling and looking for investors. So for Manchester City, the only way I can answer that is it's a very easy decision because they are not struggling financially for obvious reasons. So for them to pull out, it doesn't change their world at all. But for a Juventus, a Real Madrid, a Barcelona, Manchester United, $500 million in debt. So for them, it's a lot harder.
Right. I mean, I'd love to be in a position where 300 million was something I felt I could turn down. You can understand why those struggling clubs were so tempted by this, shall we say. But did they just completely misread the room on this one?
I think they knew there would be some sort of negative reaction. I've no doubt about that. Maybe they didn't quite feel there'd be the huge fan backlash that there was. But I don't really think that was the crux of it. The crux of it was, because remember, look, at the end of the day, the Glazers took over Manchester United against everyone's wishes, against the fans' wishes. At that particular point in time, there was a huge backlash against the Glazers taking over. So they are not averse to having this kind of negative reaction. At the end of the day, it's business. It's business. So do they care about the fans? Well, yeah, they'll have their ear on the fans, but I don't think that was their overriding decision-making process. I think in all of this, the only thing I can think of today is that possibly it was a ruse, Scott, a ruse to push and force the hand of UEFA to do more for the clubs in the European competition. And I'm already hearing this morning that UEFA have put plans in place to bring in an investment house based out of London. And I can't confirm the company right now, but to look at ways of increasing the finances to the tune of 7 billion. So maybe that's what they were looking for. Maybe that's the reaction that these clubs were looking for.
It was a negotiating ploy. UEFA are obviously very quick, particularly with Man City. I think they turned around and said they were going to welcome them back into the European family very quickly. Is football better or worse off for the last 48 hours?
I really don't know. I couldn't answer that question. Put it this way. One thing I'll say is this conversation, this issue, rather than conversation. The conversation needs to happen, and it hasn't happened really. And the only time that it cropped up was the Project Big Picture, which came out just before the pandemic last year, where the big clubs were looking to go it alone or to force more revenues out of the Premier League. So that was kind of a precursor to this. But is it better off? The issue needs to be forced out into the open and dealt with. And I keep coming back to it. The TV audiences are showing that the format itself is not agreeable. The finances and accounts of these clubs are showing that they are in deep trouble. So those issues needed to be brought out into the open, and they needed to be forced out into the open. So I would say probably in the long term, it's for the better.
What's the one question that no one's asking and they should be asking about this whole thing?
What's next? What do we do next?
What do you think is next?
Was this just a 48-hour media storm? Is that it? Yeah. I think that, so in terms of what's next, the relationship between rights holders and formats, so whether it's Super League, La Liga, Premier League, it doesn't matter what the sport is. You can talk about UFC, you can talk about NFL, MLS, MLB, which is the baseball, is how do we create a model which is, number one, sustainable, which has always been difficult with regards to football because they've always eaten money, like I mentioned before. But also, how do we get a direct and better correlation with our audiences and what the audience wants? So in the past, when it came to rights, the rights holders would just go to a broadcaster and say, how much did you pay last time, Scott? Mm-hmm. All right, add 20% and we're all good this time. there was very little data to show numbers, viewing numbers going up, viewing numbers going down. Now there is. So now we can see exactly who's watching, how long they're watching for, what they're watching. So that needs addressed. That's the big question that needs addressed. And I follow a lot UFC, but I'm not a fanatic of UFC. But I love the way the UFC business model, Scott, has developed over time. It was a niche product that had what's called in sports business ultras only following it. So it didn't matter who was fighting who, they would go and watch those fights, those UFC fights. Dana White, what he's always tried to achieve is to grab what's called more of the casuals, people that might only watch Conor McGregor, but don't watch any of the other fights. And that's what football needs to address. When Manchester United are playing Burnley, and sorry if you're a Burnley fan, the world is not interested. But when Manchester United are playing Liverpool or Manchester United are playing Arsenal, those casual fans will switch on and they will tune in. I know people, Scott, that only watch the World Cup every 4 years and don't watch any other football in between. How do you grab those fans? That's what's next.
My wife's one of them, but I'm not sure you're going to grab her on a weekly basis. It's interesting as well, because we've talked about it, and I've heard it also talked about it. We've got almost like two perspectives on this. One, we've got global businesses, the football clubs as global businesses, and then we've got the football clubs as locally responsible. And they don't seem to have found a way to kind of marry the two, you know, the fan reaction within the domestic market versus the global audience that's clearly out there. Can they marry those two?
Oh, great question. I really don't know. I mean, put it this way, the noise from the last 2 days has been primarily from the domestic voices. Yeah. Because you and I are both from the UK. We know what it's like to be brought up in that football environment, the 3 o'clock on the Saturday. Look at the complaints there were about moving from 3 o'clock fixtures, yeah. Friday night games, Monday night games. This is outrageous because that's in our blood. What they don't understand is there are fans in the Middle East, in the Indian subcontinent, in Southeast Asia, who are awake at 3 a.m. on a school night, midweek, for the Champions League in particular, watching these games for 2 hours. What are you doing to cater for them, number one, as an audience? And number two, how do you then monetize them? Because if you can make that product more palatable, i.e. better kickoff times for South Asia and for Southeast Asia, you can then grab them with regards to other forms of revenue streams, such as getting them to purchase products online, for example, or merchandise, or signing up and subscriptions and all the rest of it. So you're absolutely right. There's a huge disconnect between the domestic audience and the global audience. And I think there's one thing that I need to throw in there as well, which is in the last rights deal for the Premier League, the domestic rights deal went down, not up. It was only an increase in the global rights that kept the Premier League's revenue on par with what it had been before in terms of its rights deal.
So we had JP Morgan, obviously the American investment bank, bankrolling this. I mean, they're obviously used to the US climate where they're more used to franchises. Do you think they were unprepared for the level of local domestic noise that we're going to get on this one? And okay, and I was also going to ask, do you think the introduction of these merchant banks into football financing is a good or a bad thing, or do we have to wait and see on that?
I think we'll have to wait and see. But look, it's a business, and this is the argument I've been having with fans over the last couple of days. My late father, whether Newcastle United, because that's my team, Scott, and he's a Newcastle fan, whether they won or lost, he was like, But he used to get his blood boiled when he read the annual accounts, because at that time, Newcastle United was a PLC. If you, as a fan, want to understand what's going on with your club, you have to understand their accounts and their finances, instead of just burying your head in the sand, which a lot of fans do, and all they care about is win or lose at the weekend. So it doesn't matter what name you're putting on it. Is it a merchant bank that owns the club? Is it an oligarch that owns the club? Is it an oil sheikh that owns the club? Is it a PLC? it doesn't matter. It's still, that monster still needs funded in some way, shape, or form. And that hasn't changed since the 80s. The biggest clubs in the 80s were the clubs that were the most well-funded, however that money came from. And some of your older viewers, Scott, will remember and understand that the Littlewoods Pools, which was a, how would you describe it? Lottery?
Yeah.
Funded and bankrolled clubs in the 1980s, the clubs that they owned and were involved in the 1980s. So that hasn't really changed. It's a different type of investor that has a different type of return expectation.
I mean, building off that, if we look at, say, we talk about Manchester City, the fans can feel relatively assured that their club's future is going to survive because they're in a decent place. Do you think fans could one day regret that this didn't happen for some of those struggling clubs? Do fans need to look at that business picture and go, do you know what, you might not like this, but you'd rather they be in this and survive rather than financially flop?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, so this has been the great thing about all of the fan reactions over the last 48 hours, which is there's outrage. And I understand that, Scott, the outrage. With, greed, those are the words that have been used, disgust, greed, all of those kind of things. But I bet you the same fans, Scott, are saying, can we sign Leo Messi, who's out of contract at Barcelona at the end of this season? Can we sign Leo Messi for our club? I bet you there's not one Manchester City fan who's watching this, Scott, that would be saying, we don't want Leo Messi arriving at the Etihad Stadium this summer. Absolute nonsense. How do you pay for that? That's the problem.
Leo Messi, for the Man City fans, at least they can probably afford it. Whereas Barca's and some of your other struggling clubs really wanted this cash.
His salary is 60 million a year. It needs to be paid for. How do you pay for that? So it doesn't matter which club you're talking about, you need those funds and those finances. So you're right, they may regret this at some point in the future because there's a cash cow there. I think the way they've gone about it was a little bit ham-fisted.
Yeah.
But the principle behind it, I still think is correct, which is they need a more sustainable model and a more sustainable broadcast model to increase revenues as the seasons go on.
So, biggest lesson from this European Super League: next time, hire a decent PR agency?
Quite probably, yes. I think the lesson, put it this way, on a serious note, the lesson that they need to learn from this going forward is, you were talking about a 20-team league and you only had 12 teams signed up. At least have all your ducks in a row before you announce this. If they were going to go for this and they were serious about it, and bearing in mind, Scott, like I said before, there's a little caveat, which is, was this all a ruse just to force the hand of UEFA to dish out money? And that's quite possible. That'll come out in the next few days if that's the case. But if you were going to launch a European Super League, a 20-team European Super League, you need to know who the 20 teams are that are involved. Not, well, we've got 12, there's another 3 that are about to sign up. The other 5 we kind of don't really know at the moment. It's not going to fly.
So we wait to see whether or not this was actually a masterstroke from these 12 clubs or not. Joe, thank you very much for your time. I guess it only remains for me to quote Raheem Sterling this morning and say, bye then.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for your time.